Good morning. Today we're beginning Chapter 8, which focuses on workplace culture and socialization. Before we dive in, I want you to think about any job you've had, whether it's retail, food service, an internship, or even volunteer work. Think about your first day. What were the unwritten rules you had to learn? How did you figure out what was really expected of you beyond what was in the job description? The workplace isn't just a place where we complete tasks and earn money. It's much more complex than that. Every workplace is a repository of values, attitudes, norms, and accepted procedures. In other words, every workplace has a culture and often multiple subcultures operating simultaneously. Today, we'll explore how these cultures shape our work experiences and how we learn to navigate them. Let's start by understanding what we mean by culture. Culture is one of the foundational concepts in sociology, and it has two main components that we need to distinguish clearly. First, there's material culture, which includes all the physical things we work with, what the text calls all accoutrements of life. For specific occupations, this means the things that are worked with and worked on. A machinist works with a lathe to shape metal into useful products. A probation officer might consult computerized employment listings while trying to help an ex-felon become a productive member of society. Then there's non-material culture, which includes beliefs, values, attitudes, norms, and accepted procedures. This is intimately connected to the uniquely human ability to create symbols and use them as a basis for communication. While the tools and equipment certainly influence how work gets done, it's really these non-material elements that shape workplace behavior and create culture. Now, what exactly are symbols in the workplace context? Symbols encompass anything that can be used to convey cultural beliefs, values, attitudes, and norms. So let me give you some concrete examples. Language is a major symbol system, including occupation-specific terminology that we call argot. Every profession develops its own vocabulary that outsiders do not understand. There's also dress, the clothes we wear, communicate volumes about our roles and status. Ceremonies mark important transitions and achievements. Jokes often reveal what's really valued or criticized in a workplace. Rituals create shared experiences and reinforce group identity. Myths, the stories organizations tell about themselves, communicate values and expectations. All of these symbols work together to create and transmit workplace culture. They tell us what matters, what's acceptable, and how we should behave in our work roles. Workplace cultures are now recognized as making important contributions to organizational success and failure. This wasn't always understood, but research has shown how powerful these cultural forces can be. Workplace cultures usually share in society's overarching culture, but they also have distinctive elements of their own. Just like society as a whole, organizations have formal structures, organizational charts, reporting relationships, and official policies. They also have what we call an official culture that's established by those at the top. This includes formally stated values, specific rules and procedures, and sometimes even dress codes. You might be surprised to learn that some organizations even have company songs, which is common in certain Japanese firms. But remember, there's always more going on beneath the surface of these official cultures. Within every organization, subcultures develop to have their own values and rules. Sometimes these subcultures even develop their own language or ways of communicating that differ from the official organizational communication. Some cultural elements emerge spontaneously. Workers develop their own ways of doing things, their own informal networks, their own shortcuts, and workarounds. Over time, these become embedded in the organizational culture through informal means. They just become the way things are done around here, even though they are not in any official manual. This spontaneous cultural development is just as important as the official culture in shaping how work actually gets done and how people experience their jobs. On the other hand, some cultural elements are deliberately created and propagated by organizations. Let me give you a fascinating example. McDonald's Hamburger University in Oak Brook, Illinois. Every year, 3,500 franchise owners and managers from around the world spend 2 weeks at the university. They attend labs and classes learning about food preparation and business operations. But more importantly, the program aims at creating managers with ketchup in their blood. People who are completely devoted to their work, their restaurant, and the McDonald's way of doing things. This corporate culture gets instilled through frequent stories about Ray Kroc, who led McDonald's rise to become the world's premier fast food operation. They organize team-based contests that test participants' knowledge of the firm's history. When people return to their restaurants, ceremonies honor successful franchises and regional meetings constantly reinforce McDonald's core values of quality, service, convenience, and value. Organizational cultures become especially evident when two firms merge and each has its own set of values and ways of doing things. Now let's shift our focus to socialization. Socialization is the process whereby individuals become part of society by learning the dominant culture. Through this process, people acquire a working knowledge of values and norms. They also gain a sense of where they fit by learning about the roles they're expected to occupy and how to relate to others while occupying those roles. Socialization is essentially the process through which we become human. Think about it this way: an unsocialized individual would be like an alien, completely adrift in a world where everything is bewildering. Other people's activities would be incomprehensible, their language unintelligible, and nothing in life would be predictable. Socialization provides us with what the text calls the tools, maps, and code books that make it possible to survive and prosper among other humans. Socialization is a crucial part of working life because nobody chooses an occupation or takes on a job knowing everything they need to know about doing that work. Some people do undergo what we call anticipatory socialization, where they're exposed to particular lines of work through their families and social networks. This is common in police work, which is disproportionately filled by men and women who grew up in families with multiple police officers. The same thing happens in military families, which are the major suppliers of future officers. But these are actually exceptions. The reality is that most workers, perhaps the majority, have not consciously prepared for the work they do. They simply took a job after a brief search or fell into one because their social network made it available. Many occupations, even higher level ones like college professor and journalist, are staffed by people who just drifted into them. Here's something important to understand about modern work life. Occupational careers are characterized by significant fluidity. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2005, more than 3% of employees left their jobs each month, and most of them took jobs with other employers. The Bureau also found that at the beginning of 2004, wage and salary workers had put in the median of only 4 years with their current employer. As you might expect, older workers stayed at the same job longer than younger ones. Among workers 45 years and older, about half had been with their current employer for 10 years or more. In contrast, only about 1/4 of workers between 35 and 44 had tenure of this length. A survey that followed American workers from 1979 found that between ages 18 and 38, men held an average of 10.2 jobs. Women held an average of 9.9. This gives you a sense of just how much job mobility characterizes modern working life. This significant job mobility means that work-related socialization occurs on numerous occasions throughout our careers. Many things learned in past jobs will be relevant to present jobs, but there are unlikely to be things that need to be unlearned too. Socialization for an occupation or specific job isn't likely to be straightforward because cultures and subcultures are not always models of consistency. American culture, for example, celebrates democratic egalitarianism, yet it also places great value on winning, success, and getting ahead, none of which are supportive of an egalitarian social order. Similar ambiguities and contradictions appear at the organizational level. A business firm might have an avowed devotion to customer service that exists uneasily alongside a commitment to maximize short-run profits. Cultures also aren't static. They can change due to technology and economic developments, influence of other cultures, leadership change, or simply through the human desire for novelty. Socialization conclusively ends only when a person dies or ceases to be sentient. Some periods of socialization are more intense than others, but the cumulative effects of day-to-day socialization can be just as important as brief periods of concentrated socialization, like what happens in military boot camp. Although socialization is ongoing throughout the lifespan, it may occur in distinct phases. For someone preparing it for a particular occupation, these phases may be marked by shifting emphasis over the course of a training program. Sometimes the process is staged and formal. Other times it's fluid and informal. Let me give you a detailed example that illustrates how complex occupational socialization can be. A classic study examined what happens to medical students as they go through the process of becoming doctors, and it reveals the complexity of professional socialization. Many aspiring doctors entered medical school with a strong orientation toward helping people. They also assumed that during their studies they would learn much of what they needed to know to be successful doctors. But during the first year of medical school, they had no contact with patients, and most of their coursework seemed highly academic and removed from actual medical practice. In response, students began taking a pragmatic, some might say cynical, approach to their education. They let go of the idea they would learn anything there is to know and concentrated on what they thought would appear on exams. This erosion of idealism was reinforced by the student subculture that supported this pragmatic approach. By their third year, students began working with actual patients, interviewing them about medical histories, performing physical exams. This made their education less academic, but it didn't restore their earlier idealism because now patients are treated as cases rather than as individual people. By the time they finished their training, these former medical students had taken on a distinctive occupational role of doctor. This illustrates how the work a person does often becomes a key element of individual identity. Sociologist Irving Goffman put it this way: a self virtually awaits the individual entering a position. He will find a me ready-made for him. There's a large element of truth to this. The occupations we hold and the jobs we do substantially affect how we see ourselves and how others perceive us. Occupational roles carry certain expectations about individuals that are independent of their personal characteristics. As they say in the military, you salute the stripes, not the person. These ready-made qualities of occupational roles result from formal and informal socialization processes that affect both the people in the roles and the people who interact with them. One source of occupational identity is distinctive physical appearance, sometimes achieved through alteration of the body, either temporary or permanent. Let me give you some examples of how physical appearance marks occupational identity. The ordination ceremony for a Roman Catholic priest includes a moment when a lock of hair is snipped from the head, a remnant of times when monks had distinctive hairstyles. that mark their separation from lay people. More drastic is the absence of a little finger that marks members of Japanese organized crime gangs known as Yakuza. This physical alteration permanently identifies someone's occupational affiliation. But more commonly, occupational identity is marked by distinctive uniforms. All of us have learned to recognize different kinds of uniforms and the special occupational roles they denote. Some uniforms indicate subservient occupational status, like those worn by domestic servants. Other uniforms, like those worn by letter carriers, indicate a particular occupation, but not one that carries special status. Still, other uniforms are meant to convey authority. Police officers, military officers' rank insignia, or the elaborate vestments worn by clergy in many religions. Occupational roles and status can also be conveyed by physical surroundings. Many new employees quickly learn that certain areas of a building are reserved for higher ups, corner offices being prime examples. The vertical location of an office can also reflect position in the organizational hierarchy. The higher the floor, the higher the rank. At the General Motors building in Detroit, offices on the 14th floor was synonymous with the upper reaches of the firm's hierarchy. The entrance to that floor was patrolled by a security guard, and lower-ranking employees had to have a special permission to gain access to this executive area. Inside buildings, furnishings, and other features often serve a socializing function by providing clear indications of the organizational positions. Before it became affordable, wall-to-wall carpeting was reserved for top executives. Stories have been told of carpet edges being cut away because an office was occupied by someone deemed unworthy of this status indicator. The old expression "to be called on the carpet" indicated that a worker had been summoned to a higher-up's office, most likely regarding some transgression. In the non-material realm, socialization into particular occupational cultures can be fostered by invoking the lives and deeds of people who have embodied the ideals of a particular occupation or organization. One prominent example comes from the history of nursing. Prior to the mid-19th century, nursing had quite low occupational standing. It was practiced by ill-educated women from lower social strata who worked in dirty, chaotic hospital settings or served as little more than domestic servants in sick people's homes. During the Crimean War, Florence Nightingale, an Englishwoman of aristocratic background, transformed the horrible condition of military hospitals. Through force of personality, she ensured medical supplies and hot meals were available for patients. She stressed hospital hygiene, recruited young women from respectable backgrounds to serve as nurses, and established schools to train them. Through these efforts, she greatly elevated nursing public image and established herself as someone to be emulated by nurses worldwide. Other occupational heroes include Edward Murray for journalists, Albert Einstein for scientists, Thomas Edison for inventors, and Jane Addams for social workers. Although all workers undergo some degree of occupational socialization, its extent and intensity vary considerably from occupation to occupation and organization to organization. As a general rule, the more professional the occupation, the deeper and longer the socialization process will be. This is partly due to the longer training periods required of physicians, attorneys, professors, nurses, and similar professionals. Lengthy formal training is necessary to develop specific skills, but it also creates environments well suited to both formal and informal socialization for future occupational roles. For example, while in law school, a student learns how to understand and apply the law, but also learns to be an attorney. Being an attorney means more than having technical competencies. It entails internalizing appropriate values, behaviors, attitudes, and professional demeanor. These are acquired through observing practicing attorneys, perhaps during internships as well as through formal means like the Code of Ethics. Workers lower on the occupational scale have fewer opportunities for socialization through long-term training programs, but other characteristics of their job may create a firm basis for intense socialization. One of the most important of these characteristics is danger. When a job puts workers in potentially dangerous or hazardous situations, the attitudes and actions of coworkers may literally become matters of life and death. This produces an extreme need for what sociologist Emil Durkheim called mechanical solidarity, a commonality of values and beliefs, behaviors, along with an adherence to traditional ways of doing things. Examples of occupations where danger creates intense socialization include mining, police work, and high steel construction work. Their circumstances are similar to those in Army units, where mutual support and fear of letting down fellow combatants have been crucial motivators for acting courageously when lives are on the line. Let me explain Durkheim's concept of mechanical solidarity more fully. Mechanical solidarity involves a commonality of values and behaviors, combined with adherence to traditional ways of doing things. This type of solidarity is extremely important for certain kinds of work because it creates predictability and a measure of security in inherently uncertain and dangerous circumstances. It also solidifies the belief that workmates will support one another when situations turn dangerous. Strong interpersonal ties are essential for effective operation of small groups working under dangerous circumstances, and disaster can result when these ties are broken or weakened. Work relationships based on mechanical solidarity create the trust and mutual dependence necessary for survival in high-risk occupations. Think about it. If you're working hundreds of feet above ground on steel construction or deep underground in a mine, you need absolute confidence that your coworkers will follow established procedures and watch out for your safety. Socialization is likely to be most intensive and extensive when workers experience some degree of isolation from the outside world. Sometimes the situation is deliberately manufactured, such as monasteries and convents or police and military academies. These locations for intense socialization can be viewed as what sociologist Irving Goffman calls total institutions, places that are closed off from the outside world so they can control most aspects of a person's life. Here, isolation is reinforced by systematic efforts to strip recruits of their individuality through measures like requiring institutional clothing and regulation haircuts. A degree of social isolation can also result from a value system that divides the social realm into us and them. Again, this is fostered by dangerous working environments, where the source of perceived danger is outsiders, especially certain categories of people. Rookie police officers, for example, are socialized to take on an attitude of generalized wariness and to be especially distrustful of certain groups. Adding to the distinctive job environment of soldiers and police officers is the likelihood that their work schedules depart from normal working hours. They are not unique in this. Musicians and railroad crews also experience social isolation because of the unsocial work schedules. This means their primary source of social interaction is with fellow workers, and socialization into their particular line of work becomes intensified as a result. Just as some occupations separate workers from other people temporarily, other occupations do so spatially. Some occupations are limited to specific locations. Miners work where there's ore or coal. Deep sea commercial fishermen live near harbors when not at sea, and loggers work near forest. In earlier phases of industrialization, many regions had company towns that housed large concentrations of textile workers, steel workers, and other employees. The conjunction of working life and residential life often created distinctive identities and not coincidentally high degrees of worker militancy. Some of the most intense labor actions in the U.S. occurred in mining communities and company towns like Pullman, Illinois, and Homestead, Pennsylvania. Socialization is usually a long, drawn-out process, but there may be times when transition to a new status occurs abruptly through ceremonies known as rites of passage. These are common in many cultures and mark transitions like becoming an adult, getting married, or moving from life to death. Rites of passage have three general phases: separation, transition, and incorporation. The separation from others may be dramatic, perhaps requiring days alone in the wilderness. In modern society, separation is less stark. An example might be an aspiring doctor leaving home to enroll in pre-med courses at a distant college. The transition phase has been characterized as an ambiguous, unstructured state of in-betweenness. Initiates have lost some of their previous identity but haven't yet completely taken on a new one. It's a time of learning and assimilating the subculture of the occupation, as well as convincing established members that one is worthy of admission. The final stage, incorporation, is usually marked by a formal rite or ceremony with a structure that may remain unchanged for decades or centuries. Pain, humiliation, or both can be found in informal rites of passage administered by colleagues and workmates. One common example is hazing, such as occurs among certain coal miners. Underground coal mining is dangerous work, and high levels of trust and respect for workmates help reduce fears that are inherent to the job. Personal qualities that can make for trust and respect can't be assumed. They must be demonstrated through daily work and initiation rites. The practices in some mines would strike outsiders as revolting. New miners receive unflattering names like plunger lip, lard ass, and maggot mouth. They undergo the ritual of making a miner, which involves being swatted with boards by veteran miners. Sometimes they are subjected to extremely degrading contests. These ceremonies may seem disgusting to outsiders, but they effectively transmit the importance of solidarity with the work group and deference to its collective will. For long-standing members, these ceremonies reaffirm existing values and social roles for everyone present. Complex organizations are assemblages of separate units like departments and divisions. Members of these different units not only have different tasks and skills, but they are also likely to have different visions of what is necessary for organizational success. One structurally based source of subculture formation is the distinction between staff and line functions. This distinction initially emerged in military services. Line soldiers and officers did actual fighting. They were literally on the front line of battle. Staff positions provided behind the lines support through functions like intelligence, maintenance, repair, and provisioning. Over the years, military staff positions have expanded considerably to the point where they greatly outnumber soldiers engaged in actual combat. Non-military organizations have also undergone substantial increases in staff position and relative declines in line positions. A manufacturing enterprise may still need production workers, supervisors, and engineers, but it will also have a large number of employees in personnel, legal, public relation, and maintenance departments. Early organizational theory stressed that staff positions should be excluded from upper organization levels and that staff members were subordinate to the line units. Actual practice has departed from theory, however. Study of organizations revealed how staff members have been able to accumulate considerable power within organizations. The wielding of authority by staff members hasn't gone uncontested, and staff line conflicts can be found in many organizations. But not all conflict centers on authority allocation. Clashes of subcultures may also be at work. Conflicts may stem from differences in age or education, as well as fundamental disagreement over goals, values, and priorities. An example of conflict caused by divergent staff and line subculture occurred in an urban welfare agency where caseworkers found themselves at odds with accounting office personnel over how much money should be awarded to individual welfare recipients. For caseworkers, the goal was providing funds to needy people, while accountants believed protecting taxpayer funds had to be the highest priority. Like cultures generally, subcultures can emerge from various circumstances: formal divisions, spatial arrangements, tasks performed, or extra work characteristics like ethnicity, age, and religious affiliation. Although separate from official culture, subcultures imparted through informal colleague-based socialization may be congruent with formal organizational goals and procedures. Informal socialization may even be essential to the effective organizational operation because so many jobs present workers with so many complexities that no reasonable amount of formal training can prove or provide adequate preparation. Through socialization, new employees learn procedures to perform and reasons for doing them, along with which ones to ignore or violate if that's what it takes to get a job done. Some occupationally based subcultures mesh quite well with the dominant organizational culture because their goals and values parallel those of management. Two examples of supportive subcultures are those associated with accounting and engineering. Accountants see themselves as designers of order. They define their role by keeping organizations on rational footing, carefully tracking revenues and costs, profits and losses. An accounting subculture permeates many organizations and is reinforced by the frequent rise of managers with financial backgrounds to the highest levels. To have a worker-based subculture that meshes with the official one is what all managers hope for. But in many instances, subcultures transmitted through interactions with workmates do not align with official organization goals and procedures. They may even be in direct opposition, in which the case they act as countercultures. Workers at a Western electric plant, immortalized in a classic sociological study, engaged in practices that markedly departed from company expectations. Instead of working to their full capacities, employees established informal output norms well below what many workers could achieve. New employees quickly learned about these practices, and if they failed to adhere to them, verbal and physical abuse brought them back in line. Many other examples of organizational countercultures exist. In some cases, participants engage in criminal activity, like teams of longshoremen who participated in organized cargo theft schemes. Many cases of on-the-job theft, cheating, and general deviance could be cited. Although some subcultures define what is and isn't permissible theft, that they may allow pilferage from employers, but not tolerate stealing from fellow workers. Countercultural values and norms and behaviors often are maintained by restricting work groups to kin or neighbors who are likely to have undergone anticipatory socialization and by scrupulously rejecting outsiders. By definition, countercultures are deviant to some degree, but their deviance need not be destructive. Some countercultures can be important sources of vitality and innovation within organizations. One example is the famous Skunk Works that operated inside Lockheed Aircraft Company. Originally set up by Clarence Kelly Johnson and the other engineers in the 1940s, the Skunk Works insulated itself from Lockheed's top management and proudly rejected many of the firm's formal structures and procedures. Instead of Lockheed's conventional bureaucratic operation, Skunk Work members relied on individual creativity, strong leadership, close teamwork, and a willingness to accept risk while designing and building prototypes of the P-80 jet fighter, U-2 spy plane, and record-setting SR-71 recon plane. When work becomes a career, socialization is likely to be most thoroughgoing. What distinguishes a career from just working for a paycheck is that the job becomes deeply embedded in a person's identity. To be a member of the clergy, for example, is to make a commitment that extends throughout one's working life. It's likely to entail considerable sacrifice and an attenuation of other aspects of life from which an identity can be fashioned. Careers usually proceed in a series of discernible stages, each with its own socialization episodes and experiences. The presence of distinct career stages provides an organized framework for life and work. However, career progression often requires moving upwards in a pyramidal structure. Here's where individual careers can collide with organizational realities. In later stages, there are only a few positions at the top. Career military officers provide the clearest example. Most are promoted through captain and major, but ascending to lieutenant colonel is more difficult. After that, officers face up or out. A few become generals, but for everyone else, military careers effectively end by their mid-40s to early 50s. This pyramidal structure means that the most people in career-oriented occupations will eventually face the reality that upward mobility has limits, requiring them to find other sources of satisfaction and identity in their work. Deep involvement in organizational or occupational careers doesn't eliminate all other social roles. Even the most career-focused individuals must navigate multiple identities and responsibilities outside of work. Moreover, a single occupation may contain a multiplicity of roles that may be difficult to reconcile. Formal socialization procedures are likely to emphasize some occupational roles to the exclusion of others, but they don't put an end to individual role strains. In teaching, for example, most students enter education programs with a strong motivation to help children learn and develop. This isn't always reinforced in teacher training programs, where the development of professional instruction techniques and classroom management capabilities makes up the core of the formal curriculum. But throughout their occupational lives, teachers face ongoing socialization experiences that pull them into different directions. They're expected to be both rigorous academic instructors, maintaining high standards and caring, nurturing figures supporting students' emotional and social development. They must follow standardized curricula and prepare students for mandatory tests while also trying to meet each student's unique individual needs. Many find themselves addressing students' social and emotional problems while being held accountable primarily for academic outcomes. These sometimes conflicting roles are embedded throughout a teaching career. As noted earlier, socialization ends only when life itself ends. This ongoing process means that role conflicts and strains continue throughout our working lives as we encounter new situations, changing organizational demands, and evolving professional expectations. Today, we've explored how workplace culture operates at multiple levels and how socialization shapes both individual identity and organizational effectiveness. We've seen that cultures can be official or unofficial, supportive or oppositional, and that they're transmitted through everything from formal training to informal hazing rituals. As you think about your future careers, consider what workplace cultures you want to be part of, how you'll navigate the socialization process you'll encounter, and what role conflicts you might face. Remember that socialization never truly ends. It continues throughout our working lives as we encounter new situations, technology, and organizational changes. Next time, we'll build on these concepts as we examine professions and professionalization, how certain occupations have tried to control their own socialization processes, and cultural development.